This video is about the intersection between artificial intelligence and software development. We're going to be talking about things like how OpenAI is hiring an army of engineers for a secret project. Google's Colab notebook is getting a new generative update. Tiffin Tech is going to demo a new AI terminal extension, and I'm going to break down the buzz around vector databases. We're also going to check out Google's DeepMind new AlphaDev tool, which is already proven to be a game changer in optimization engineering. Plus, I found this blog about how to do diagrams wrong, and that's pretty much all neural network diagrams you've ever looked at. And possibly one of the highlights of this video, we're going to be looking at GPT Engineer, one of the most starred GitHub repos around. Step aside DeepMind's AlphaGo, AlphaFold, and AlphaStar, because there's a new sheriff in town, and that's AlphaDev. And it has already discovered 2 sorting algorithms that are so useful they're used 1 trillion times a day. The details of that are all explained in this 2-minute papers video. In a nutshell, AlphaDev found these faster sorting algorithms by treating it like a game. So all the way down at the processor level, it is picking individual CPU instructions, putting them together like Legos, and it came up with this awesome sorting algorithm. It's actually 70% faster in short sequence sorting algorithms. And nobody expected this. Sorting algorithms are a problem that was basically solved already. I didn't think there was much room for optimization. Now let's talk about how this large language model that looks like ChatGPT but has power to actually build an entire app for you called GPT Engineer is changing the game. GPT Engineer is an open sourced AI tool that generates the entire code base for you based from your natural language instructions. If you want to see instructions on how to install it, some examples, all that kind of stuff, check out this Matthew Berman video. It's called How to Install GPT Engineer, and he walks you through just how simple it is to go from scratch to making a game like Snake. He did it on his first try, and there's not a bunch of cut and pastes or anything. This is really getting dead simple. So it's really starting to move up the stack a little, meaning like more high-level questions like, I want a game that kind of does this and feels this way, and I want that action to take place. And it's kind of breaking down the questions that it would need to actually execute on all the smaller steps. Which means that if you have a killer idea for a product or a game, it might be time to start getting your hands dirty. And they really won't get that dirty. This makes it really convenient. And check that out. Already it has 35,000 stars, so this is getting to be really popular. Smash that subscribe button. Now let's talk about what's driving investors to put millions of dollars into all these vector databases, because they're being pitched as sort of the solution to some of the downsides to LLMs, but is that really right? The author Devanish wrote in this article, The Billion-Dollar Database for Generative AI, about how vector database startups have generated a ton of money recently. Now the argument is they hold the solution to something called semantic reasoning, more of that long-term memory that LLMs just don't always have. Well, that's also important for things like computer vision and recommendation systems and a lot of other types of AI models also. Now when you think of a vector, you actually can go back to trigonometry and actually remember vector math. You know, arrows in a multidimensional space, you're kind of doing cosine, sine, tangent, all that stuff on it, measuring distance a lot of times, which is different from a spreadsheet-like database that you would think of with SQL. It is true a bunch of companies are jumping to vector databases even though they don't need to, but in the long run, there is something special about a vector database being the long-term memory for something that has a long-term history with a person. Like a child born today might grow up with sort of a large language model, something like how you keep restarting your chat inside of ChatGPT, but it doesn't restart. It actually remembers growing up with the child until they're a teenager, and it has the references from any time in their life. And it won't be a perfect memory, not like a huge hard drive recording the whole time, but it will be a tuned neural network that has been through all of the experiences as the same person. It remembers all the times you've talked with it, and it just has kind of what we would think of as a long-term memory. But I guess in some cases he's right. From an engineering, a development today kind of point of view, not everybody needs to jump on this bandwagon. So a CEO of a company might not need a vector database. Don't jump on it right away. In the long run, what it actually means is something very powerful. Scott Rosenberg wrote about how generative AI is also a revolution in computer interfaces. And he's right, now computers speak our language instead of us having to learn how to code their languages. And with Bing and Bard and all this ChatGPT stuff, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. Like a chatbot with enough experience and enough authority, enough permissions can do pretty much everything you might have asked an assistant to do digitally. Clear your inbox, fix a printer, change a computer setting, make an update, do something like go to the internet, find me interesting pieces of news. All of that is possible. And you know, Microsoft Copilot is just a step in that direction. We're seeing the beginnings of what's going to emerge into something that's much more seamless. And I think Photoshop will turn into something where generative fill is the entire product. I don't think there will be all the other buttons. You might say give it more of a red tone or optimize it or just remove the background. I think it's just gonna know these things. And in Scott's article, he actually goes into assuming that is kind of the future, and then what are we gonna be missing as humans? Like, are we gonna become less skilled because we don't have direct control over all of these things? Are we gonna not understand the depth of how they work? And I think the answer is probably. I eat food all the time. I'm completely disconnected from the farming process. The majority of people just won't know how to code and they won't know how to farm, and that will be okay. They'll be on higher levels, but if need be, they will be screwed. Okay, let's talk practicalities of how would you turn your organization's documents into something that you can search with natural language. Jacob Marks explained how he turned his company's documents into a searchable database using OpenAI's API. So if it's something you actually want to do for your organization, definitely read the whole article. But in a nutshell, he first had to kind of unify all of the crazy documents across his companies. He converted them all into something called Markdown. It's a very simple language. So spreadsheets, Jupyter notebooks, HTML pages, PDFs, and regular Word documents were all converted to Markdown. That's fairly straightforward, but then he has to actually take that text and break it into something called semantic blocks. And those semantic blocks come in two types. They can be written in code or they can be written in English. Okay, then you need to connect to OpenAI's API to actually take those blocks and turn them into embeddings. And once they've been converted to embeddings, it doesn't matter that they're text or code anymore. So in theory, if everything that you wrote in text was equal to everything that was in code, like if they were interchangeable, they would share the same position, the same higher level semantic block. But then you use a database, specifically a vector database in this case, to remember where all of this meaning is in the multidimensional space, which is really good for being able to pull out what's similar and what's not. In his case called quadrant, to remember all the semantic meaning and basically the position of all these embeddings. And from there, the vector database will take care of the search process for you, and it's really impressive. And you know, practically speaking, it works. And take a big organization, think of how much knowledge is actually lost, how many times they've reinvented the wheel, and now you can actually talk with all of it with a simple query. Smash that subscribe button. Now let's go visit Tiffin Tech, one of my favorite YouTubers. Now, I haven't really thought about how if you're in the terminal, basically you're using text to get around, you navigate your computer and execute things, just how much AI could improve that experience. The terminal is just notoriously specific. But you can see right off the bat with this demo Tiffin Tech showed off how you can just say like unzip a file and you don't have to remember the exact format. And in her video 21st Century Terminal with AI, she walks through a lot of these examples. Now the terminal she was experimenting with is called the Warp Terminal. And it looks like a standard IDE, but with AI tools to help with a lot of the pain points. She also liked how the Warp Terminal provided a lot of predictive suggestions. You know, basically common commands and scripts that you can run because it kind of knows what you're trying to do. It's also much better at throwing up examples and explaining commands, stuff that you rarely use or you're not totally sure if it's the right place to use that command. But TLDR, she says the experiment was super successful and that she thinks it's saving her a lot of time. And who wants to search through more documentation? Looks pretty cool to me. Did you know Google Colab is getting a new button? It's called Generate. Guess what it does? That's right, it's taking over Python coding for you. So Google Colab, it's a lot like a Jupyter notebook, but it's all part of the Google Docs world. It's an environment that you can use to code, usually with Python, all sorts of programming languages, but if you're doing it in Python, there's a new button coming to help you. And this artificial intelligence powered feature is going to help you write your code. So many fewer mistakes, so much less debugging. This is going to be very powerful for a lot of people who especially just want to run experiments. They want to play with data. It's going to be a game changer. I'm excited for it. The new feature includes code completion, natural language to code generation, which will probably be the best thing ever. Like make me a for loop that runs this 10 times or whatever. And it's just like do-do-do. And it's going to have an integrated chatbot, which probably based on the Bard technology will be helpful because Bard's not the best at natural language, but it is pretty good at helping with code. And before long, the Gemini upgrade is going to come, and that's probably going to take it to a completely new level. But right now, these advancements are powered by something called Google Cody, which is the most recent family of code modules that are built on the Palm 2 model. And it's been specifically fine-tuned for Google Colab and the Python programming language. Upgrade's going to be sick, man. So when I came across Aaron Masters' post on Towards Data Science titled, "Please stop drawing neural networks wrong," I was like, what's wrong with them? So here's how he thinks you should show 3 copies of data coming from a single source. And here's a better way to show scaling as an input. Or here's a way to show adding 2 or more things together in a logical way. And to specify that a function is happening, why don't you put a box around it, which actually makes tons of sense. Because my metaphor for a function is a gas tank. Like you put in money and you get out gas, and there's some kind of a ratio that changes. That's the function. And here he says use a script letter to indicate what function it is. Then he suggests a new shape for the sum function, and the shape kind of indicates two different shapes coming together, summing together. And then you put it all together and you get something like this, or like this, or like this, or even like this. Now let's dive into that mystery about what is this army of developers that OpenAI is hiring for? What could they possibly be doing? So the author Maggie Harrison wrote in an article called OpenAI reportedly hiring an army of devs to train AI to replace entry-level coders. So candidates go through an interview process that requires a 5-hour coding exam, unpaid. And the important part is it requires them to fix coding issues while narrating what the solution is. And narrating it is important because once we train the model, we're going to be doing this in reverse. You're probably going to type in like, what's wrong with this code, or make code that does this. And it's going to learn from all that reverse narration how to go the other direction. And you can imagine what this would be unbelievably valuable for. Selling a product that can code, that can engineer at a super high level. That's going to make companies like Google and Microsoft able to fire thousands and thousands and thousands of engineers, reducing their overall budgets by hundreds of millions of dollars, and allowing them to scale up like crazy, building all sorts of software, right? And Microsoft already owns GitHub. They have access to all of that data, right? And imagine how much they could charge for access to a tool like this. If it runs on the Azure cloud, for example, and Microsoft sales department was to reach out to a company like Ford, for example. And I say Ford because Ford is struggling mightily to build the software to compete with Tesla. They just don't have it in the wheelhouse. They hire engineers, but there's such a mismatch of the way that history of the company has gone. They don't even have access to a lot of the code that's in the car. Now they could spin up thousands and thousands of engineers to help redevelop it from scratch. And a company like Ford would pay a crazy amount of money like that. And that's just one example of thousands of companies that want to do software-based stuff. And who knows what people want to build they've imagined but just don't have the engineers to do. Hiring that army of engineers will probably be well worth it and potentially one of the most valuable things ever one day. Smash that subscribe button.